welcome to Beacon. Thank you for being here today. As you know, my name's Calvin, and I'm one of the pastors here. And I really wanted to, but she took him before I could, raise him up like Simba. That's what I really wanted to just invite you into that moment that I had playing in my mind as I was doing that. Is that appropriate? Yes, it is. It's a great day to be here, great day to celebrate for us. It's such a blessing to have people to celebrate with. We're so thankful, so blessed that God has provided us with a family. So thank you guys for being a part of that. This summer, July and August, in France, is every 4 years is the Summer Olympics. You Summer Olympics fans? Now, I can kind of take it or leave it kind of thing. I enjoy watching some of the events, but I think it's gotten kind of out of hand. Some of the events they now have, like competitive sewing, is just kidding. That is not an event. Don't go away. If that's the one thing you remember today, that's a lie. But it is pretty funny, the different things that now are Olympic sports. But most of us don't really think about the Olympics until day one, right? There's so much goes into it, though. Like the planning, preparation, the opening ceremonies. I was never one of those people. I always want to wait for the actual sport to start. But then I saw the one in China, and that was incredible. Don't know if you saw the one in England. I had to watch it. You get a text message from the king saying, watch the Olympics, the opening ceremony, if it's in England. Second lie of today. That's the last lie you'll hear today. The opening ceremony, though. And one of the things that starts way before that, I don't know if you've seen this before, is the lighting of the torch. Have you seen this? We have a photo of that, the passing of the torch. It actually started in, I think it was 1936 in Berlin. Now the history of it, whatever, we're not going to get into that. But the principle that happens throughout it is so intriguing to me. Because they light it in Greece, and then wherever the host country is, it gets passed from one person to the next, all throughout the world, different places. And as they do that, it travels routes that symbolize human achievement or what that country is known for. And throughout time, there's been some interesting things they've done. They sent it to space, not the fire, obviously, but like a radio wave up to space. They had someone snorkel, I think it was across the channel, holding it above the water as it was lit. Now, yes, it has gone out a few times, but that's neither here nor there. They've had things like they transported it over radio frequency, I think it was to Canada, and when it got there, there was a contraption that relit the flame right there. It's really intriguing, the different things they've done. But the principle itself is really what I want us to hold on to. Because today is, for me, a special day dedicating my child, my son, to the Lord. It's that idea of having an impact through the generations, passing something down, touching someone in a way that brings what you've learned, what you've gathered, your experiences, in a way to pass it down to the next generation is so special. And we get to do that today. Now, whether you have kids or not, you are still impacting people, either for the good or for the bad of future generations. And I know that this is true, that your family of origin has a huge impact on your life. Do you agree with that? Think about it. The stuff that you've experienced in life, whether good or bad, impacts who you are as a person. The family of origin has a huge impact on your life. And this passing from one to the next, like a relay race, isn't just for the Olympics, it's for each and every one of us. We have an impact on people, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. But what if we were able to choose the legacy that we left behind? This is the topic I really want to hit on today. We're going to talk about, he's one of the, if you have grown up in the church, remember that song, Father Abraham? It's now going to be stuck in your head all day. You're welcome. I'm not going to sing it because it's been stuck in my head and I want to get rid of it. It's a catchy tune, but we're going to talk about this guy named Abraham, and he is an influence in many religions, but in Christianity, he is one of the biggest influences throughout the Bible. Now, this idea of passing from one generation to the next is one that I really want us to kind of process through, for you to think about. Your impact, your legacy. Maybe for you, this idea of a torch, the Olympics is not the first place that you go. Maybe for you go to the Statue of Liberty. You ever visited this, Statue of Liberty? I'm a tourist, I'm not from here, so I do all the touristy stuff. And it is a feat. It is a sight. You go there and you see it. You do the little tour around in the boat. You get out, go see the island. But what does this represent? This represents here from Wikipedia, the statue, the torch, is a symbol of enlightenment, lighting the way to freedom and showing us the path to liberty. The current torch, which was replaced in 1986, during the statue's centennial restoration, has a copper flame covered in 24-karat gold. It reflects the sun's rays in daytime and is lit by 16 floodlights at night. Now, this in itself probably doesn't have the same meaning for you today as it did for many over the years. Because you know what this really represented for many people? It represented this idea of a new opportunity to impact their family. A new opportunity to come to a new place, to have a quote-unquote better life that you could bring for the people you loved. The sacrifices that people made in order to come to what for many was quote-unquote the promised land. For us today, it's kind of just a sight to go see for many people, or for some, it still represents things like that. But the idea is this: your family of origin has a huge impact on your life, but your choices today will impact people you'll never meet. Your choices today will impact the people you love. Your choices today will choose, intentionally usually, but sometimes unintentionally, what your legacy will look like when you're gone. Now, yes, we don't really want to think about death. It's not really a topic that we love to talk about very often, is it? But have you ever wondered what people will think of you when you're not here anymore? You ever wondered that? Like you go to a graveyard and many go and put we just had the holiday where you put the flags to commemorate, to celebrate, and you read on the gravestones an epitaph of someone's life. What would someone write about you? What do you want someone to write about you? Because you can be intentional with your decisions, right? You can choose what people remember, what you pass on to your kids, your grandkids. Now, I don't know what you want your legacy to be. Maybe it's the thing that you leave, that you want to leave, is an inheritance. Maybe you're thinking about that. You want to leave like some money to your kids to help set them up for their kids and their grandkids. Or a lake house. Maybe you have a lake house and you want to leave that. Maybe you have cars, or I don't know what it is. Maybe for you, though, it's you're thinking about, I want my kids to have good morals. I don't really care about money and all that kind of stuff. I want to leave them in a way where they are going to impact our world for the better. Ethics and morals. And if we all do our part and raise our kids that way, then our country would be better, our world would be better. And maybe that's how you think. Maybe you came to church this morning and your kids were annoying you, and so you decided you're leaving them nothing. They came into this world with nothing. You brought them into this world with nothing. I don't know. What do you want your legacy to be? Let's really think about that. Because the real life moment for us is we're all searching for impact, to have a meaning, a purpose, right? You want to matter. I recently went to a fundraising breakfast for the Make-A-Wish New Hampshire Foundation, and it's a great organization, and I love what they do. And it was jam-packed downtown in Manchester, a big conference auditorium, and they even granted a wish live through the news that morning, which was awesome. This kid wanted a swimming pool, and they had the news reporter at his house, and the kid was on stage, and you look up, and they're at his house, and it's an amazing thing to be a part of. And as I was there, I was just taken aback by the love that people have and the impact that they want to have. And I did a little research, and the original Make-A-Wish was a kid named Chris and his story. And as I was writing this message, I couldn't help but think about the impact that a few people had in one person's life that multiplied into millions of kids' lives throughout the years. Legacy. Impact. What do you want to be known for? In our story today, Abraham, he is described this way in Genesis 15. First I'll qualify. In Genesis 15, verse 6, here you'll read the name Abram. Abram was his name before God changed it to Abraham, Because God, names meant a lot. Your name meant something in the Bible, and God changed it to Abraham. But he believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. And what I want to point out here is we start this message, this talk about who God is, about what it means to be faithful. I want to point out here that Abraham didn't just believe in God, that there is a God. Abraham believed God. Because you can believe that someone exists, but do you believe the words that they're saying? This is such an important thing to really grasp before we jump in, because you can believe that God exists, but unless you believe that his words are true, his promises are true, and the Bible is true, that's going to have a different outcome for you. Many people believe there's a higher power, but do you believe in the God in Jehovah? I want to touch on 2 points in Abraham's life today. The first one is this: God's promise that seemed impossible. And the second one is God's command that seemed improbable. His promise that seemed impossible, because we serve a God that can do the impossible, and his command that seemed improbable. And guys, it gets pretty crazy on the second one, but we'll get there in a moment. So the premise is this: God said to Abraham, I am going to give you many descendants. And Abraham said, I got some issues. Ain't got no kids. And I don't own any land. Well, great nation's coming out of you, Abraham. You're going to have land and many people, and it's going to be amazing. And he must have wondered what God was going to do in that moment. Because it's interesting to note that he was promised land, but Abraham never personally owned land except for his lot where him and his wife were buried. Well, that wasn't really what God meant, was it? Also with that, God promises him descendants, and what do you need to have descendants? Children. And Abraham is like, okay, God, I get where you're going with this, but I'm 99 years old, and my wife is 90 years old, and we don't have any kids. Can you do the math? And God says, you're going to have kids? Just wait and see. God can do the impossible. We see here throughout Abraham's life that there was kind of a schematic that he followed through with his life. And it went like this. It said God would speak to him, and he would say things to him. And it started off by God saying, I'm going to send you out. And Abraham responds, well, where? And God says, I'll tell you later. I'll tell you when you get there. And then God says to him, I'll give you land. And Abraham says, where? And God says, I'll tell you later. Just wander around until you find it. And then God says, I'll give you a child. And Abraham says, well, how? And God says, I'll tell you later. And then God says to Abraham, and this is where it gets improbable and crazy, God says to Abraham, okay, you have this child, now go kill your child. Things you would never think you would hear at a church, right? Go kill your child. And Abraham's like, well, what do you mean? Climb the mountain and I'll show you when you get there. It is crazy. In this, we can see Abraham's life was such where God would tell him to do stuff. Abraham would faithfully follow, even in the unknown. I hate unknowns. My wife can attest to this. If she sends me to the grocery store and that shopping list is not detailed, she's getting phone calls. I hate unknowns. I can't make the decision on what size cheese I need to get. I need clarity. You need clarity? I want clarity. Even more so in this, when you think about your life, the promises God gives to us. He says, be faithful. Okay, well, can you help me out here? What? Can I get some clarity? No, you can wait. Here's what makes Abraham's character stand out from the rest, though. Most times, Abraham followed and triumphed. An ordinary person who faced unbelievable circumstances was faithful. And this is the key. Circumstances didn't master Abraham. He wasn't overcome by his circumstances. He mastered them. Now, this is why in Hebrews 11, it defines faith and says what he was commended for. Hebrews 11:1. Now, faith is confidence in what we hope for, an assurance in Hebrews 11, an assurance about what we do not see. This is what Abraham, the ancients, were commended for. They said when God told them to do something, okay. They maybe asked questions, but they followed him faithfully. I struggle with that, don't you? When someone wants you to do something and you don't have clarity, When God is calling you to do something, and in the midst of his calling, you're wondering why, can you give me some affirmation? I like affirmation. Can you show me? Why is this happening, God? But Abraham followed. In this, though, maybe you're wondering, okay, so yes, God is faithful, and he gives us promises, and sometimes he doesn't reveal it to us right away. But what does that mean for me? Well, first and foremost, there's good news. The good news is you have a choice whether to follow him or not. In Joshua 24 it says, "But if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourself this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates or the gods of Amorites." And obviously you're not serving the gods of the Amorites, but you fill in whatever gods you want to serve, whatever you put your trust and faith in, because everyone's putting faith into something, whether it's your bank account, whether it's your marriage, your friends, yourself, in something. Here we can see it says, Joshua says, "But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." And this is such a key piece. You get a choice. But the question probably stands, why choose God? Like people probably tell you, oh, you should choose God. Why? Well, for me, a key verse comes in Hebrews 6, where it gives this illustration of an anchor. If you've been out in the ocean, you know an anchor is one of your best friends. Because in the midst of a storm, when things are crazy, you can drop that anchor and know you're not going anywhere. You're secure. You're firm. And in this, we can see it says in Hebrews 6:19, we have this hope as an anchor for our soul, firm and secure. In this, the storms of life, we can have this lifeline, this anchor that yes, you go through the storms and it doesn't make the storm always disappear, but you have this hope, this anchor, this assurance that God is going to be with you for eternity and that nothing can take that away from you. It's a perspective change right here like none other. Abraham was described as a sojourner. Now, we don't really use the word sojourner very often, but we'll sub the word resident alien. I've got some experience with that. The U.S. government calls me a resident alien. I have the card to prove it, and I legally have to carry that with me everywhere I go. This is the thing about a resident alien. They're not from here. There's a timeline. There's a temporary nature to their residency. On my resident alien card, there's a date that says if you do not renew it by this date, you need to leave the country. It's temporary. And in this, Abraham was living in a temporary nature. And the thing with temporary nature is, by definition, a temporary thing is temporary. Defining something by its term, by its name, but it doesn't last. There's an end date. And temporary things that don't last, if we put our hope in those things, we're going to have some issues. Where you place your hope matters. Well, and so I guess as we think about our legacy, as we think about what we're holding on to, as we think about what matters to us, maybe I'll ask that question. What do you have hope in? Is it your job? I've kind of come to notice this, that as soon as you leave your job, it's almost like you're forgotten the next week, right? You get your party, everyone celebrates, you get your cake, or whatever it is, if there's a healthy option, I don't know. You celebrate, and then the next week they replace you, and it's almost like you never existed. You notice that? If you put your hope in that, well, what do you do when you lose it? Maybe for you it's looks. You put your hope in what you look like. And I think we've all seen how Botox only prolongs the inevitable, right? Like there's a point in life where you just want to tell someone, hey, you need to start embracing the way you look because the Botox is making you look worse than if you didn't do it at all. It's the inevitable. If you place your hope in your looks, what do you do when they fade? If your hope is placed into, I don't know, relationships or fame, success, effectiveness, or your health, your physical body, what happens if you get sick? Temporary, fleeting. If it's in stuff, the things you own, well, we always use this terminology, right? This analogy. You never see a hearse pulling a U-Haul. Because you can't take it once you're dead. What do you want your legacy to be? The impact to have. The problem is all these things are fleeting, are temporary. And if that is what you put your hope and your worth in, well, A legacy worth its salt is the one faithfully anchored in Jesus, in my opinion. This is the only thing that will withstand the test of time. Someone used this analogy that I heard recently. They said, your life is as if you are putting out your clothes for what you're wearing the next morning. Because the next morning is eternity in heaven. Your life is only so long, but eternity is forever. And so if your life is placing out the clothes that you're going to wear when you go to heaven, then you need to be preparing for what's next, preparing for eternity. We can leave a legacy that has an impact for people who live after us, absolutely. And my hope is that my legacy will be one that points to a hope that is eternal. Because the problem is, if you're hoping in something temporary, there's a timeline. And when that day comes, you no longer get the choice. Like if I wait until my temporary resident alien card, till that date comes, people do it. If you wait till that day comes, you don't get to choose anymore. The U.S. government comes and says, see you later, here's your ticket. What do you want your legacy to be? We see that Abraham, man, he wanted a legacy of faithfulness. In Hebrews 11, it explains him. The Hebrews 11 is a chapter that has all the different faithful people, like the Hall of Fame of faith in the Bible. And Abraham's in there. He made the list. It says, by faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went. Why? How? Even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God, heaven, eternity. And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. God can do the impossible. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, that phrase always gets me, it makes me laugh. And he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and as countless as the sand on the seashore. This is one of the main things I want you to hear from our story today. God's promise that seemed impossible. Let's dig into that for a moment. I don't think we can underplay this phrase, very old. Sarah was, it says, very old. In Genesis 18, then one of them said, talking to Abraham, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son. Now Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent, which was behind him. Abraham and Sarah were very old, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, after I'm worn out and my Lord is old, I will now have this pleasure. Then the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, will I really have a child now that I am old? Is there anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Impossible, right? I don't think there's any ladies in their 90s that are thinking they're going to have another child. Impossible. He's 99. Probably can't have another child himself. Impossible. Very old. And here's what I've found. When God promises something and it seems impossible, we start to either reject it or try and problem solve to see how we can make it possible. I've found that as a husband, there's certain times where if there's a problem, I don't always have to solve it. I've learned that in my 9-10 years of marriage. And sometimes my wife wants me just to sit there and listen to the problem and let it just rest for a little bit. Have you learned that one yet? Hopefully. Abraham and Sarah were the same way, though. They heard something impossible. They trusted that God could fulfill promises, but they couldn't understand how. So they're like, all right, God, we'll help you out. Anytime you try to help God out, probably a bad start. So what they do is this. Sarah, with Abraham's agreement, says, here, my love, take Hagar, my servant, and have a baby with her. Okay. I don't think that's probably the best thing to do, is it? And that's what Abraham did. And he gave birth to a child with his wife's maidservant. That sounds like a reality TV show, right? Like, I don't know, like something pretty crazy right there. And we think we have skeletons in our closets. This is a crazy family. And yet, God says Abraham makes the hall of faith. Shows that God can use ordinary people for extraordinary things, right? God can do the impossible. How often do we want the solution to the problem without the waiting? I heard a story recently. A renowned speaker was talking about when he was in Jerusalem, and he went up to a rabbi, and he said to this rabbi, okay, I have a question for you. And the rabbi said, okay, what's the question? And he said, as a rabbi, do you think, how much percentage of your life do you think you spend in Egypt, in the wilderness, or in the promised land? Now, if you know your history, Jewish history, what he's referring to is, in Egypt, you're in captivity. In Egypt, you don't have control and things aren't going the way you want them to go. In the desert, you're wandering around clueless, just waiting for God to tell you something. And in the promised land is his provision. Now, as someone who wants comfort and doesn't want to have trials and issues, I want to be in the promised land, wouldn't you? Wouldn't you want to be in a place where it was great? And the rabbi, he looks at this guy and he laughs. And the guy's like, why are you laughing? He said, you Americans, this is the rabbi saying it, not me. You Americans, you're so funny. He looks at him and he said, you want to bypass the desert and just live in the promised land. And he said, for us, for me as a rabbi, I say that 70% of your time is spent in the desert, waiting. Would you like to wait? I hate waiting. Like when I drive, if I'm in a lane and that lane's going slower, what do? Go in the next lane, which then goes slower. So you just keep on going in a lane. Same thing at the grocery store, right? I'm like, where am I in a hurry to get? I don't even have anywhere to go. I just want to be the first one there. I hate waiting. This rabbi, what he's pointing out is, in the desert is where so much life, so much growth happens. In order for you to be faithful, you've got to have your faith tested, right? How do you know if you're faithful if you've never had your faith tested? To get to the moment where you're known as being faithful, to where you hear God's answers and you see God at work, you have to go through the trials and storms of life. Now, the good news is that we believe as Christians that you have that anchor. That in the desert, it's as if there's a rope tied to you so that you can never be truly lost. You're just waiting to hear where God is taking you. Now, I wish God would give me the answer sooner, don't you? All right, God, I wish I didn't have to wait for this. But the challenge is, how can I live faithfully even while I'm in the desert? We want comfort and joy without the struggle, without the work. To leave a legacy of faithfulness, you have to be faithful in how you live. And it means living through all the seasons, holding on to the one that you're being faithful to. A friend of mine recently said this phrase, and it just made me laugh and stuck with me. He might even be here today, I don't know. He said this, we all have a plan in life until the reality of life punches you in the face and you adapt. I was like, oh yeah? Feel like you got a few black eyes from life recently? Maybe a few bruises on the shoulder? Broken bones. This is what life does, right? It brings trials, it brings storms, and sometimes it leaves a mark, has an impact. Faith hangs in there when it looks impossible, because we serve a God that can do the impossible. He is greater than our circumstances, and this is what Tara and I held on to all throughout our journey to have our son Owen. Some of you know, but many years ago we had a miscarriage, and for about, I get the timeline wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, 7-8 years, we were waiting to have a child, and it didn't happen. Now, maybe you've had a story similar, and our story is not the same as everybody's. This is just our story. But for us, in the midst of that trial, it wasn't easy. If I could have had a child without having to go through that, I would choose that. Anybody who says they wouldn't, they're a liar. I don't want to go through the trials. But in that, we held on to the truth that God is a God that holds on to his promises. And we just believed that he would provide a child for us. And the crazy part about the story is we went through fertility. I'm a proponent for medical care. God gave us brains, and we can sometimes use them, and that's great. And so we went through some treatments, all this kind of stuff. And we were a month away. We said we're going to delay it one more month from a major treatment. And in that 1 month that we delayed, Owen was conceived. And if we would have gone through and not waited, he would be lost. So don't tell me God can't do the impossible. I truly believe he can. It's our story, not everyone's. But what I know is this, God keeps his promises. God's seemingly impossible promise was to Abraham, you will have many nations come out of you. And he's like, I'm old, don't own any land, and don't have any kids, and can't have any kids. Don't worry about it. I got it. Yeah. I know you said you got it, but can you tell me how? Oh, just wait. Yeah, I know you want me to wait, but I don't wait. I act. No, you need to wait. Well, okay. Well, I know you said wait, but I'm going to have a kid with this other lady, and we'll call it good, right? No. The promise that God had seemed impossible. And maybe if you're in your life today, you just feel like, man, what I've gone through, there's no way. No way God can have an impact. No way God can change things. No way God can provide. I just would put it out there and say, we have a God that can do the impossible. And there's a promise that God has for each and every one of us. And it comes in the most quoted Bible verse ever, John 3:16, where it shows God's nature, who he is, and what he thinks of us. It says, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. You have a choice to follow or not follow, to have that anchor for your soul, that you know that you can spend eternity with God right now and in heaven. And it starts by accepting his free gift of grace. How we live, there has to be something more. You ever wondered that? Like, surely there's got to be something more than just my little life. There is. And if you realize that and ask for forgiveness for how you live and follow him, it opens up this door to eternity. It opens up this way for the Spirit to fill you and for you to know who God is. You can believe there is a God, but do you believe in God, in what he says, his promises? God kept his promise to Abraham, and then things get weird, and we'll close with this. God's command that seemed improbable. In Genesis 22:2, it says, then God said, take your son Isaac, your only son, whom you love. It's kind of building it up, the suspense right here, right? Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah, sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain, and I will show you. That you don't think you come to church and hear about child sacrifices, right? That doesn't line up with what really you think God should be about. And even as I read it, it's like, this seems weird. And it is. God doesn't, it's not like today God's like, hey, Calvin, go sacrifice your son. No, that's not how God works. God's promises never contradict his nature. So what is God doing in this moment? Well, I believe that Scripture shows us that God is testing Abraham's faith. Because you see the whole story unfolds, and I'm not going to read the long Scripture for time, but in essence, God says to Abraham, take your son up the mountain. And can you imagine Isaac at that moment? Abraham's like, hey, we're going to go do a burnt offering, a sacrifice. And he's like, okay, sounds good, Dad, let's go. And he's probably a little older. We think of him as a little kid. They say he's probably in his 20s or 30s. But Isaac probably wasn't dumb. He was wondering, where's the lamb or the animal that we're going to sacrifice? And Abraham's like, oh, don't worry about it. That's the weirdest hike you would ever go on, isn't it? This is not normal, though. It's a one-off practice of God testing Abraham's faith. And it's not so much a test to produce faith, but to reveal his faith. If he was to be Father Abraham, faithful, in the hall of faith, God is preparing him, testing him for what he has for him to do. God does this. He tests those who are faithful to prepare them for what he has for them to do next. And we see here that he gets up to the top of the mountain. And as soon as Abraham goes to sacrifice his son, he says, stop. Imagine the relief that Abraham must feel in that moment. And God provides a ram in the thicket for Abraham to sacrifice. Abraham was so faithful that he would sacrifice his own son. That's crazy. And yet that is what God has done for us. Sacrificed his only son so that whoever believes in him should not perish but have eternal life. There is an analogy, a symbolism here of what God is showing us through the Old Testament, leading us to what we believe in, the Messiah, Jesus, who died on the cross as the only Son of God, but who came up and rose from the dead so that we could have new life. Abraham knew that God's will never contradicts his promises, so he held on to the promise that his family line would continue through Isaac. Faith does not demand explanations. I wish it did. Faith rests on promises. My faith is in the God that I know through the Spirit that I've received, through the scriptures that I read, and the experiences that I live. Whatever circumstances you have going on in your life today, the invitation is this: have faith in the one who can do the impossible and works in the improbable. This is the God we serve. Everyone, I hope, wants to leave a legacy that has lasting impact on everybody to come. And for me, as I was chewing through this, like, what do I want my legacy to be? Well, there's a verse in the Bible, and it ends with these 6 words in Matthew 25. It says, "Well done, good and faithful servant." That's what I want my legacy to be known as someone that followed faithfully after Jesus as God led. Let's pray. God, we just thank you for this time. Pray, God, that you would be with each of us as we choose to follow you. God, we pray this in your name.